He thought the listing was a prank. A ranch that size for under $100? But the paperwork checked out, and solitude was exactly what Dakota Granger needed after what happened back in Tulsa. That was before two towering women stepped out from the shadows of the barn barefoot, bronzed by the sun, and built like Olympians, and declared, without blinking, that he was bite-sized and breedable. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. And if stories like this catch you off guard in the best way, hit that subscribe button because tomorrow's episode goes places even wilder than this one. The dirt road was longer than the map suggested. Dakota Granger had counted 6 broken gates, 3 rusted-out tractors, and 1 wooden sign so sun-bleached he couldn't read the name carved into it anymore. The pickup coughed smoke as he turned into the final stretch, and for a moment, he thought he'd made a mistake until the house rose into view. 2 stories of weathered wood and silent windows, the kind of place realtors call rustic when they mean haunted. But the strangest part wasn't the porch swing still swaying, or the chimney that puffed smoke even though he hadn't lit a fire. It was how well the place was kept. Too well. He parked under the only tree that looked like it still had life in it and stepped out, boots crunching on dry grass. The wind was low but constant, the kind that whispers if you let it. Dakota wasn't the kind of man who spooked easily. He'd seen a man gut-shot in a diner without blinking, but something about the air here felt thick, like the land itself was holding its breath. The paperwork had been clear. 67 acres of mostly flat pasture, a working well, and mineral rights nobody had touched in half a century. The seller? Anonymous. The transaction? Wire transfer. No questions asked. He'd called it a fresh start. A place to disappear. Maybe put some cows on the field. Build something with his own hands. But now, as he took his first step toward the house, the front door creaked open on its own, and 2 shapes stood in the shadow of the barn behind him. He didn't turn right away. There was a part of him that knew better. You don't survive what he'd survived without listening to the little voice that whispers when your instincts go quiet. The kind of voice that said, "You're not alone, and you were never supposed to be." When he finally turned, they were already walking toward him. The first woman was tall enough to shadow him completely, her bronze skin catching the sunlight in a way that made it hard to look directly at her. The second was no shorter, with eyes so dark they made the sky behind her look pale. Both barefoot, both wearing dresses too clean for ranch work, both smiling not with kindness, but with recognition. "You made it," the taller one said, voice smooth as creek water but deeper than he expected. "We were starting to think you'd gotten lost." Dakota opened his mouth, but no words came. It wasn't fear. It was something heavier, like he just walked into the final page of a story he didn't remember reading. "You're smaller than we imagined," the second woman added, her smile widening. "But that's okay." The taller one stepped forward, tilted her head, and let her gaze rake over him from boots to belt buckle. "You're bite-sized," she said softly, "and breedable." And for the first time since he got here, Dakota forgot how to breathe. Dakota's first instinct was to laugh, but it caught in his throat before it could escape. There was no wink, no teasing glint in their eyes. These women weren't joking. They looked at him like they'd been studying him longer than he'd been alive. The taller one, Ember, though he didn't know her name yet, moved a step closer, and the dust rose like it obeyed her. Her muscles moved with the ease of someone who had never once asked permission for her strength. The other, with storm-dark hair and a posture that whispered royalty, stood a half step behind but no less present. Together they made the house behind them feel like a stage, and Dakota felt like the only audience member still trying to find his seat. "You don't have to be afraid," said the one with the dark hair, her voice somehow softer now, like velvet soaked in honey. "We've been waiting. A long time." Dakota found his footing, at least enough to shift his weight and rest his hand on his belt buckle. "There's gotta be some mistake," he said, though even as he said it, the lie clanged in his ears. "I bought this land through a public listing. Don't know who you are, but this isn't—" "Dakota Elias Granger," Ember said, interrupting him with a calm that felt colder than wind. "Born March 2nd, 1989. Tulsa, Oklahoma. 14 stitches in your left shoulder. Still afraid of deep water. Still running from things you don't say out loud." He froze. His mouth stayed open, but the words never formed. Ember didn't look smug. She looked certain, like she was reading from a page she had memorized long ago. "Who told you that?" he asked, voice low, not because he was trying to sound tough, because he was trying not to shake. We don't learn it, said the other woman, stepping forward at last. We remember it. Dakota finally looked away. Not out of shame, out of self-preservation. Because something in their eyes didn't just see him, they knew him. Not the version he offered to bars and strangers. Not the man on paper. They knew the boy who screamed into pillows. The man who left behind more than he ever admitted. They knew the weight he carried, and they didn't flinch from it. I didn't come here to be part of something weird, he said, backing toward his truck. I came here to work, to start over. I just need quiet, that's all. You'll get quiet, Ember said. Eventually. After the land accepts you. And after you accept yourself, the other added, without malice. He stopped halfway to the truck, then turned to face them again. You know my name. What are yours? There was a pause, as if they'd waited years for that question. I'm Ember, the taller one said. I'm Allura, said the other. Then Ember smiled again. That same knowing curve of the lips. And you're not here by accident, Dakota. You were chosen, and the choosing wasn't ours. The word chosen stuck in Dakota's head like a thorn. He tried brushing it off with a scoff. Tried to convince himself that these women were just crazy. Maybe squatting on old land and spinning stories to scare him off. But no matter how many times he repeated that to himself, it didn't change how Ember had said his name. Not just like she knew it, but like she'd waited years to say it aloud. He stayed by the truck for a long minute, one hand resting on the side mirror, watching them. They didn't advance. They didn't run. They just waited, patient as oak trees. Eventually, Dakota walked back toward the porch, not because he believed them, but because he needed answers that didn't come from a speeding pickup and a cloud of dirt behind him. The boards creaked under his boots as he approached, but the women didn't move until he stood within arm's reach. You said I was chosen, he said. By who? Allura's eyes flicked toward the hills behind the ranch, where the sunlight faded into dusky lavender. By the land, she said. By what sleeps beneath it. By the pact our mothers swore. Dakota narrowed his gaze. What pact? Ember gestured toward the rocking chairs. Not an invitation, an instruction. He sat, partly because his legs were tired from the drive, partly because this whole thing felt like a dream walking the line into nightmare. Ember stayed standing, her figure a silhouette against the setting Sunday. 3 generations ago, our bloodline was offered something, she said. Strength beyond what the body could carry. Time that stretched longer than the bones could justify. But there was a cost. Allura spoke now, her voice barely louder than the rustling wind. We were made strong, made to wait, made to stay untouched, and in return, we were promised a man. One man. The right man. Dakota leaned back. You're telling me, you're both virgins? Ember said, her smile curling at the edge like fire catching dry grass. Yes, that's part of the pact. To keep the vessel pure. He blinked at her. You make it sound like I'm livestock. No, Allura said, stepping closer. Livestock can be bought and sold. You're more sacred than that. You're the end of the waiting. The bridge. Dakota swallowed hard. What if I say no? Ember didn't answer right away. Her gaze didn't turn angry or desperate. Just still. Then the land goes back to sleep, she said. And we keep waiting. Another generation, another war, another century. The silence stretched between them again, but this time, it wasn't filled with tension, it was heavy with truth. Dakota could feel it in his chest. Not magic, not faith, just rightness. Like puzzle pieces sliding into place after sitting in the wrong box for years. I didn't come here for any of this, he said quietly. No, Allura whispered. But we did. Dakota didn't sleep that night. Not because he was scared, he'd known fear. Real fear. The kind that knocked on doors after midnight and wore uniforms stitched with regrets. What he felt now was something older, slower, a kind of unease that settled in his bones like sediment in a creek bed. He lay in the unfamiliar bed inside the farmhouse, his duffel still zipped at the foot, listening to the creaks of the house settle in around him like a stranger making space. Every sound felt intentional. Every gust of wind outside the window sounded like breath, like watching. By morning, Ember was already in the kitchen, her back to him, pouring something thick and dark into a mug carved from stone. Sleep well? She asked without turning. Dakota hesitated. Not exactly. She handed him the mug without making eye contact. It'll help. He looked down at the liquid. It didn't steam, didn't smell like coffee. It had the scent of earth after lightning, wet and charged. He didn't drink it. You keep saying I was chosen, he said. But you haven't shown me why. Just words, weird looks, prophecies. Allura appeared from the hallway with a leather-bound book in her arms. Its edges were cracked, its spine wrapped in what looked like braided reeds. She placed it on the table like she was setting down something alive. Dakota pulled out the nearest chair slowly, watching their faces. "What's this?" "Your story," Allura said. He opened the cover. The pages inside were hand-drawn ink and charcoal. Dozens of sketches, layered symbols he didn't recognize. Some pages were smeared with dirt, others were water-damaged, but in the center of one page near the back was a sketch so sharp it stopped his breath cold. A man. His face, wearing the same jacket he had on now. He looked up, heart pounding. "How?" Ember sat across from him. "It was drawn before either of us were born. No way. No one could have. This is some trick." He shoved the book back toward her. "You could have found pictures of me online. Printed this out. Faked it." Allura remained calm. "There's more." She flipped the pages to a section lined in gold thread. The words weren't English, weren't anything Dakota recognized, and yet, as his eyes passed over the lines, his lips began to move without meaning to. "Small of body," he whispered, reading aloud, "but strong of spirit, will mend the bone, will fill the womb of the land." He stopped, looked up. "You've read that before," Ember said. "No, I haven't," he said, voice low. "But your blood has," Allura replied. "It remembers." Dakota stared at the book like it might catch fire. His pulse thundered in his ears. There was no denying it now. He didn't just stumble onto this place. Something had called him, named him, and worse still, part of him didn't want to run. Dakota woke to the smell of something sweet and thick boiling on the stove. The sky outside was barely bruised with morning, just a pale wash of blue rising over the ridge. He hadn't remembered falling asleep, but he had dreamed of antlers growing from soil, of hands pulling stars from earth, of Ember and Allura standing in the barn, glowing like suns just before they go nova. He shook it off, splashed water on his face from the tin basin, and made his way downstairs. The whole house felt warmer than it had any right to be, like the wood-remembered touch. Ember stood barefoot by the cast-iron stove, stirring a pot that looked too old to still be in use. Whatever was inside, it gave off a scent like wild honey and warm cream, but deeper like bark and blood and something ancient with memory. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Allura was outside already, her silhouette framed by the barn's open doors. She moved like she was gliding, each step precise, almost ceremonial. Dakota followed without thinking, his boots scuffing the ground, his breath catching in the chilled air. When he stepped inside the barn, he saw them 3 copper bowls, perfectly round, each placed in a triangle on the packed dirt floor, each filled with a white substance that shimmered like moonlight trapped in liquid. "What is this?" he asked. Ember stepped past him, her dress whispering against his sleeve. "We call it the milk." Allura met his eyes. "It comes from the soil, but only when the land is ready. Only when you are here." He knelt beside one of the bowls. The surface didn't ripple. It held his reflection, not just his face, but different versions of it. A young Dakota, a broken one, an old one, and something else, one he didn't recognize but felt in his chest like déjà vu. "What does it do?" "It binds," Ember said. "Not just flesh, spirit, memory. It carries what the land cannot speak aloud." He looked at her, brows furrowed. "You drink it?" They nodded. "And I'm supposed to?" Allura knelt beside him. "Not yet. Not until the 3rd Sunday." He blinked. "What does that mean?" "You'll know," Ember said. And just like that, they left him in the barn with the bowls, their footsteps silent in the dust. He stood slowly, suddenly aware of the silence pressing in. No birds, no creaking beams, just him and the milk. That evening, he sat on the porch, watching the horizon. Ember brought him a jar of the same thick liquid, now cold, sealed with wax. She didn't say anything, just placed it beside him and left. He held it for a long time, feeling its warmth even through the glass. Something about it called to him, not with words, with pull. By nightfall, he'd placed the jar on his bedside, unopened, but he dreamed again. And this time, the land spoke back. It started with the humming, faint at first, like a forgotten lullaby carried through the beams of the old farmhouse. Dakota had heard it before, not as sound, but as feeling, like something behind the walls was breathing just beneath the grain. That morning, he followed it without meaning to. barefoot, shirtless, the floorboards cool against his skin. He moved through the house as if pulled by a string too delicate to break but too strong to resist. The locked door at the end of the hall had been there since his first day. Ember had touched the knob once, briefly, then said nothing. Allura always looked away when passing it. They'd never told him not to open it. They just never offered the key. But today, it stood ajar. Dakota hesitated, hand hovering just above the wood. The air beyond was warm unnaturally so, like the breath of a beast waiting patiently in its den. He pushed the door open slowly. It didn't creak. It welcomed. The room was small, no windows. The walls were lined in dark cloth, stitched with silver thread that shimmered like starlight trapped in velvet. The scent hit him next earth, milk, and something like old blood. At the center of the floor was a circle of painted symbols, and at the center of that circle, a hatch. Wooden, ancient, bound in copper. He knelt. The moment his fingers touched it, something inside him recognized it. Not as memory, as destiny. The hatch lifted without effort. Below, a staircase carved from stone spiraled downward. He descended, each step lit by a glow that had no source. It wasn't electric. It was alive. The room below was a chamber, round, womb-like. The floor was dirt-fresh, soft, and warm to the touch. The walls pulsed faintly, like the inside of something breathing. Symbols carved into the stone flickered with dim gold light. At the center of it all, a stone table, barely waist high, and placed at its center was something wrapped in linen, small, delicate, human-shaped. He stepped closer. His shadow stretched across the walls, touching the carvings, and something inside them responded. The glow deepened. The humming grew stronger. He unwrapped the linen. Inside was a doll, not wooden, not cloth, bone. A small figure carved from what looked like ivory, but darker, and it wore a face. His face. Dakota stumbled back, nearly knocking over a rusted chalice that sat just beside the altar. The weight of everything pressed in the journal. The milk, the women's eyes, the dreams. He clutched his chest, trying to breathe. And then he heard her, Ember, standing silently at the top of the stairs. "You found the womb," she said softly. He looked up at her, trembling. "What is this?" Allura appeared beside her, eyes shining with something between reverence and apology. "It's where the land made you," Ember whispered. "Where the first version of you was carved." Dakota didn't speak, because part of him already knew it was true. He ran at dawn, didn't grab his bag, didn't grab his boots, just slipped into the cold morning air barefoot and breathless, heart pounding like it wanted to claw out of his chest. The sun was still low behind the hills, casting long, trembling shadows across the fields. The dirt stung his feet, but he didn't stop. Every instinct in him screamed for motion, for distance, for out. He didn't look back. He didn't have to. He could feel the house watching him. He passed the barn. The milk bowls were gone. Not tipped, not spilled, gone. Like they had never been there. He cleared the far fence in a single reckless leap and hit the outer trail running. The old dirt path that had brought him in now stretched before him, twisted by light and fog. He could still hear the river in the distance, still smell the pine, but none of it felt real. None of it felt right. 10 minutes passed, maybe 20. Then the wind shifted, and there it was, the porch, his truck, the swing, the front door ajar, exactly how he'd left it 3 days ago. Dakota skidded to a stop, gasping, drenched in sweat. "No," he whispered. "No." I ran. But the land didn't care. It had folded in on itself like paper. Like he was trapped in a story with only one ending no matter which page he turned. The door creaked. Ember stood in the threshold, calm and barefoot, a steaming mug in her hand. "We wondered how far you'd make it," she said. Allura stepped out behind her. No malice in her face, no triumph, just knowing. "Let me go," Dakota said, voice hoarse. "You've got your prophecy. You've got your bone doll. I don't want this." "You think we trapped you?" Ember asked. He didn't answer. "We didn't bend the path," Allura said gently. "The land did. You belong to it. You always have. We didn't pull you here, you sank." Dakota staggered back, looking at the sky like it might crack open and offer him a rope. "I'm not a pawn in some ancient fairy tale." "No," Ember said. "You're the ending it's waited for." He turned to run again, but his legs didn't move. Not frozen, resigned. His body knew what his mind refused to say aloud. "You don't leave a womb," Allura whispered from behind him. "You grow out of it. Dakota sank to his knees in the dust. Something broke inside him, not from fear, from grief, from the slow collapse of everything he thought was real. His chest rose and fell like the wind itself had taken over. "Why me?" he asked, voice barely audible. Ember walked forward and knelt beside him, because no one else ever stayed. The porch swing creaked. The crows circled overhead. And for the first time since arriving, Dakota realized something terrifying and undeniable. He hadn't been trying to escape the ranch. He'd been trying to escape himself. The storm rolled in the next night, as if the sky had been holding its breath until he stopped running. No lightning, no thunder, just a heavy sheet of rain that fell so steady it sounded like a heartbeat against the roof. Dakota sat by the fireplace, wrapped in a wool blanket that wasn't his, listening to the water trickle down the chimney. Ember was by the hearth, drying herbs that smoked faintly when they caught heat. Allura moved through the kitchen like a memory in motion, her hands slick with rainwater and soil, mixing something thick in a wooden bowl. No one had spoken about the escape. No one had needed to. The land had made its answer clear. But it was Dakota who broke the silence. "What happens if I choose to stay?" Ember looked up, her eyes catching the firelight. "You already have." "No," he said slowly. "Not just physically. I mean actually stay. Accept whatever this is. Join the pact." Allura returned to the room, drying her hands on her apron. "Then the binding begins." He stared into the flames. "And what does that mean?" Neither answered right away. Ember stood and left the room. When she returned, she carried something wrapped in coarse linen. She placed it on the table in front of him and unwrapped it slowly. Inside was a blade, hand-forged, short, ceremonial. Its handle made of bone. Its edge still flecked with rust or maybe blood that time refused to wash away. Dakota swallowed. "You want me to?" Ember shook her head. "Just a drop." Allura set a small bowl beside the blade. It shimmered faintly, like it remembered what it had held centuries ago. "One drop binds your name to the land, your breath to ours, your body to what came before." Dakota hesitated. His fingers brushed the hilt of the blade. It was warm, too warm for metal untouched by fire, but it didn't burn. It pulsed. He pressed the tip to his palm, just beneath the callus. The sting was brief. The blood fell thick and red into the bowl. Ember added a drop of something milky white. Allura followed with a pinch of ash. When they stirred it with a carved bone stick, the mixture hissed, then settled into stillness. The bowl pulsed once, like a heart. Dakota stepped back. "What now?" Ember lifted the bowl and stepped outside. Allura beckoned him to follow. The rain had slowed to a mist, soft and silvery under the moon. They walked toward the barn. The glyphs on the wood carvings he hadn't noticed before were glowing faintly now. Symbols older than any alphabet. Shapes that spoke directly to the chest. Ember poured the mixture into the dirt at the barn's threshold. The earth swallowed it like water. The glow deepened. The air grew warmer. Dakota felt it in his ribs, his bones, behind his eyes. It wasn't a contract. It was a welcome. They took him to the spring the next morning. It was hidden behind a thicket of juniper and stone, far beyond where he thought the land ended. But the ranch was bigger now. Or maybe he had just stopped seeing it through the eyes of a man who expected things to be explainable. The water was clear, almost silver, rising from a crack in the earth that shimmered when the sun touched it. The air around it buzzed, not loud, but charged. Like standing next to a live wire wrapped in silence, Ember stood waist-deep in the spring, her dress floating like mist. Allura sat nearby on a flat stone, grinding petals into powder with a pestle made of white horn. Dakota crouched at the edge, his fingers trailing in the water. "What is this place?" "It's where we changed," Ember said. "Where the pact was sealed." "Changed into what?" Allura looked up from her work. "Into what the land asked of us." He watched her hands move over the stone. They were strong hands, worn, but they trembled slightly at the edges now. Not from weakness, from remembering. "We weren't born tall," Ember said quietly. "Or strong, or sacred." Allura picked up the thread. "We were chosen, like you, pulled from what we were and made into something that could wait, something that could survive the centuries without breaking." "Chosen by the land?" Dakota asked. Ember nodded. "By the thing beneath the land." Dakota turned toward her. "You make it sound like a god." She didn't answer right away. Then, "Not a god. A need," Allura added. "A hunger, a memory, a promise wrapped in root and stone." They told him then of the others, the ones who came before him. Men who wandered too close too soon. Some left. Some couldn't. A few stayed long enough to taste the milk, to see the glyph's pulse. But none of them were him. They were close, Ember said. But not whole, not the right blood, Allura added. He stared at the spring. Its surface reflected nothing. No sky, no faces. Just the shimmer of potential. And what did you give up? He asked. They were quiet for a long time. Our families, Allura said finally. Our names, our years, Ember whispered. We don't age like humans anymore. We don't die like them either. But we don't belong to them. Dakota sat on the edge of the spring, letting the cold bite at his skin. And what would I be giving up? Ember looked at him with a softness that was almost unbearable. Your loneliness, she said. Allura stood and walked toward him, her palm outstretched. Your smallness. And what do I get in return? He asked. She smiled. Not triumphant. Not pleading. Us. The air shifted. The trees bent. The spring glowed brighter, as if it had been waiting for that question to be asked. And answered. They waited until the third dawn after the binding. Dakota stood shirtless in the barn, his palm still marked where the blade had kissed it, though the wound had closed. Around him, the air was different now, thicker, slower. Like the dust had stopped moving, like time had exhaled. Allura circled the barn's center with crushed herbs and ash, tracing a pattern only she seemed to see. Ember stood beside Dakota, one hand resting on his back, warm and steady, grounding him to the moment. This isn't a sacrifice, she said softly. I know, he replied. And he did. They had explained nothing about what would happen, only that it had to be him, only that he had to want it. And somehow, in the stillness between breath and bone, he did. Allura poured the last of the mixture into the carved lines beneath their feet. The earth drank it in, and the glyphs across the barn walls ignited not with fire, but with light like honey and lightning mixed together. The barn doors sealed shut behind them without touch. The sky outside cracked open with golden clouds that didn't belong to any weather system he'd ever seen. Then the singing began. Not with mouths, with everything. The wood hummed. The walls breathed. Dakota's skin pulsed in rhythm with something ancient waking up beneath the floor. His vision blurred not from fear, but from expansion, like he was growing beyond the limits of his body. The sisters stood across from him now, eyes glowing, dresses flowing with a wind that didn't move the trees. They weren't human anymore, not entirely. Their beauty was unbearable. Not because of shape or skin, but because of truth. They had become what the pact demanded. And now he would too. He stepped forward, not because they called him, because the land did. He moved to the center of the pattern and knelt, placing both palms to the dirt. It was hot now. Alive. It welcomed him like a heartbeat welcomes blood. And just like that, he felt it. A tether. Not just to Ember and Allura, but to everything. The land. The bones. The buried. The becoming. He gasped as something entered him, not a force, not a possession, but a remembering. He saw all his versions at once. The boy hiding in closets. The man standing on train platforms with nowhere to go. The stranger walking into this ranch thinking he could disappear. He was none of them now. He was blooming. When it ended, the barn doors opened on their own. Outside, the ranch looked the same, but the soil glowed faintly at the roots. The trees leaned in as he passed. The wind whispered his name, not as a warning, but as a greeting. Allura took his left hand, Ember took his right, and together, they stepped into the light of a world that had rewritten itself to receive him. Not a prisoner, not a prophet, just the man the land had waited for.